welcome to the Theory of Everything. In front of me is Zachary Zoe, and I am Reuben Bowlby. Today we're going to be talking about why we have a society and why it is working.
Okay. I'd like to begin this discussion with a seemingly simple question. I'd like for you to define what a reasonable person is, if you can.
What a reasonable person is.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't want to answer that, what is reason?
Someone who adds value to themselves and others in society.
Can you elaborate?
Somebody that has, I suppose, first the want or the desire to help others and to further themselves, and then actually acts upon it.
That seems like a narrow definition or scope for what a reasonable person is. Are you comfortable with that definition?
It could be elaborated on, for sure.
The framework that I have is reason is the understanding or the concept that a specific action causes a specific reaction. And then a reasonable person is someone who understands this. So we live our lives, we have various experiences. That doesn't mean that we understand what's happening to us. Most of the times we are simply responding to stimulus. Like if someone speaks to you, you speak to them. If someone is violent towards you, you're violent towards them. That doesn't mean you understand what's happening. You're simply going with the flow, as some would say.
Mm-hmm.
But there is an underlying logic, and the reasonable person perceives that, and as you said, can use that to his advantage, and bring about certain reactions, add value to the world.
So I suppose somebody who is reasonable is aware that there are actions that are beyond logic and reason, that there's times when they're not always using logic and reason, and they work to improve or increase the likelihood that they'll make logical decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even though it's not directly relevant to our discussion about society, my observation is that we essentially react. But it's possible for us to set up our reactions. So we can prepare ourselves to behave a certain way in the future. For example, if you have no food in your fridge, then you anticipate that you'll be hungry tomorrow, which is normal. Then you can go to the store today, buy that food, put it in your fridge, and then tomorrow when you decide to cook breakfast or get lunch or dinner for yourself, you'll have that available to you. So that when you're cooking dinner or your meal that next day, you're responding to the fact that there's food in your fridge, but you set that in motion the day prior. And it's like that in almost, I would say, every respect of life. Because you were born in America, I presume, and your parents raised you a certain way, and that sort of set the domino in motion. And ever since then, you have been programmed to act a certain way, and so on. You have agency in a sense, because you can still deliberately act and so on. But truly, I think you're responding and you're reacting to things.
In a sense, we need to remember who we've programmed ourselves to be, or remember the habits. That's why writing down our goals is so important. Writing down and then acting on those thoughts. If you just leave them as thoughts or you don't write them down, maybe you actually never bring them to fruition. So if we can I think that's why momentum and just getting on a roll with things, if you will, like setting those habits is so powerful. And if you get caught in the cycle of destructive behaviors, it's tough to get out of it. But once you do, your momentum kind of takes you out of that. Have you ever kind of been in a situation where that's happened?
Yeah, you raise a good point, because even though we are perhaps the most adaptable creature on the face of the planet, we highly value consistency. perhaps that is due to the fact that we have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
One of them prioritizes like logical thinking. The other one is more creative and abstract. And if you listen to Jordan Peterson, who is a psychologist, his explanation is that we have both of these hemispheres because reality is like that.
Mm-hmm.
And our brain evolved to facilitate our understanding reality.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes of his is, "Our thoughts die so we don't have to,"
Mm-hmm.
where he outlines thinking as Avatar 1 versus Avatar 2. One that most people know is angel versus devil. That's very dualistic way of thinking, and intelligent people can create Avatar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and beyond. And if I'm walking along a ledge and danger is to my right, like I might have a thought to go that way, but I'm going to kill that avatar in a sense, a metaphysical sense, so that I can survive.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that over and over and over again. And we're constantly making those decisions based on input we get from our environment.
Mm-hmm. And so you were saying something about how we have habits, and those habits are like chains. They
Mm-hmm.
constrain our behavior so that we continue to engage in those actions forever. And it's easier. It doesn't require as much self-control as doing something new or something dangerous, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. So you brought up the left and right hemisphere. Jordan Peterson talks about it like order and chaos. And the reason we need order is because of chaos. But if all we had was order, then life would kind of lose its meaning in a sense. Like we have to navigate the chaos, like someone who is finding and exploring new land, or somebody who's going to Mars, right? Like
Sure.
there's chaos involved with that, and if we didn't have order, we wouldn't be able to survive that. And if you scale that down to our day-to-day lives, like yes, we have these habits, yes, we have things that are in our control, but so much of it is out of our control, and we have to have a philosophy or a framework to navigate the chaos.
Yeah, that's based upon the premise that that risk is associated with value.
Mm-hmm.
Now notice that's not a causation, and it's not a fact.
Mm-hmm.
You can do something risky that has no value associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, risk is associated with value. When you invest in the stock market, for example, there is the chance that you will experience a great return on your investment. And if you have a startup, then the same is true.
Mm-hmm.
Even pursuing a creative endeavor, like becoming an artist or a musician or becoming a teacher, which requires that you sacrifice maybe a more lucrative career, those all are risky decisions, but there's value associated with them.
Mm-hmm. And I would argue too that risk almost forces you to create those habits, right? If you have it all on the line, you're going to take each day a little more seriously. You're not going to waste your time. You're going to try to allocate your time to create the best possible outcome. So Elliot Hulse is his name, a famous YouTuber, talks about creating a situation where you cannot fail. And his one example is like move out and make it happen. Because if you're sitting on the couch and just dreaming about it, right, but you still have a safety net, right, you're not actually choosing to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And once you get out there and create the risk, so many things are going to open up with you personally and just the outside world who you're able to meet and network with that never would have happened if you hadn't created that risk in the first place.
So habits are very powerful, and they've been well researched and documented. Are you aware of classical conditioning and operant conditioning?
Yeah, I could do some reviewing for sure, but I have the educational background, yeah.
They're both psychology terms, and I'll go ahead and briefly describe both of them.
Yeah, for me and the audience.
So classical conditioning, if you've heard of the Pavlov experiment,
Mm-hmm.
Pavlov had a dog, had the bell, and then every time he rang the bell, he would serve the dog food. The dog would salivate in response to the food, but because he heard the sound, he would associate the sound with the food. And Pavlov continually did this and eventually got to the point where simply ringing the bell would cause the dog to salivate.
Yeah.
Now that's classical conditioning. You can, of course, find more precise definition online.
Right. But that's an excellent one for our purposes here.
Yeah. Now, operant conditioning has more to do with incentives and disincentives. Operant conditioning is like this. If you have a pigeon, this was the example. If you have a pigeon in a box and then he presses one button, then he's rewarded with food. If he presses another button, he gets shot. He doesn't necessarily have to get shot, but that was one of the experiments. Over a period of time, whenever the pigeon would learn to press only the button that would reward him with food and never press the button that would shock him. And this revealed that all organisms, because this provided insight into ourselves as well, all organisms respond well to incentives, and this ingrains behavioral changes. I think habits is a manifestation or a result of operant conditioning. Because if you have, if you're trained to behave a certain way, let's say you open a door for someone and then a person thanks you. It's like you're a very kind person. Then you consider that to be an incentive. It's something positive or a reward to you. But if whenever you open a door for someone, that person says, "You're a chauvinistic pig. Never do that for me again." You consider that to be like a punishment. And over time, that habit would be eroded until it becomes permanently extinct. And you would just stop opening doors for people because of the possibility, or maybe in your mind you might even consider it a causality, that opening the door is going to get you hurt.
Yeah. So, as you described that, I guess the first things I thought of were social Darwinism and like productive selfishness. I guess is a way to navigate that chaos, or that the chance that you opening the door may get you in trouble. You opening the door may just have that person smile at you and say thank you, right? If your goal is to achieve this the more positive reaction every time, you may not be deterred by the one or two times that this happens, right?
Yeah.
So if you keep moving forward, thinking, I know that this is going to be good for me personally. This is selfish, but it's also productive for other people, in a sense that I'm adding more value to me, I'm adding more value to the world if I just stay on this path and not be deterred by them a few times that this happens, right? Understand where that person might be coming from, right? Maybe they were having a bad day, maybe their viewpoints, right, don't necessarily agree with yours, but you can go about your day without arguing with each other.
Yeah, because you just described mixed signals. And
Yeah.
that's a serious issue. I think it's highly influential in how we live. This is merely an opinion. You can call it a theory, but I think that society kills anything it considers confusing. Confusing, or kills is clearly a metaphor.
Yeah, if it doesn't have rhythm, if it's not providing, it kind of dies.
It's not about rhythm or dying or something like that.
Yeah.
It's more like if you are trapped in a room with a venomous snake and then a non-venomous snake, and they look completely identical. Are you in your trap going to kill the first snake, kill the second snake, kill both snakes, or do nothing and let yourself die? Because and assume that if you do nothing, you will die.
Right.
What are you going to do?
I'm definitely not going to do nothing.
Exactly. So you're left with only three options: kill one, kill the other, kill both, and you can't tell the difference. That is what I mean by a mixed signal, because
there's information present, and although it's only a few options, right, we still can't, or we're still unable to make the quote-unquote best decision. So there is no best decision for us to make necessarily, other than to kill both snakes.
Yeah, if you're self-interested, and it's a fair assumption that people are self-interested. To be honest, I wouldn't trust someone who said they weren't self-interested. Our entire government, our culture, our economy, they're all founded upon the supposition that we're self-interested.
Yeah.
But my point is that if you're in that situation where you can't tell the difference between a harmful snake and a harmless snake, you're going to kill both of them so long as you're motivated by self-interest. If you're in the position of the snake, then your objective is to clearly indicate that you're not dangerous to society. You're not dangerous to anyone because you don't want to be killed. Now consider in real life, like what are the possibilities of, or when can you have a clear signal? When can you have a mixed signal? Is if your traffic lights were not green, red, and yellow, but were instead light blue, dark blue, and just normal blue, that would cause havoc. No one would be able to drive because no one would be able to tell what exactly the signals were.
Or if they did, it would take longer.
It would take longer, yeah. I still think that more people would die,
Definitely.
regardless.
Oh, for sure.
And if our interactions with each other were confusing, and like the word for I want to kill you and you're my friend sounded extremely similar, that might also cause problems.
So what's our problem here? Is our language obsolete?
No, that's not my point, because our language is like I want to kill you and you're my friend sound very different in English. I don't know about any other language. Society and these cultural developments, language, the law, traffic lights, the roads, rules, they've developed in such a way so that they give clear signals. And when you, and it's because confusion results in death. It literally can result in death, pain, suffering, all needless.
So you bring up a good point, and you brought it up last time you were here too, is that the government's job isn't to take care of us necessarily, it's to protect us from evils, if you will. It's to govern us in a way that removes that confusion you're talking about so that we can live independently, right? Like, not completely independently, but for ourselves, as long as, you know, certain things are taken care of. And then it would require us then to take care of each other. So once you've checked yourself off the list, if you will, once you've developed yourself in a way and achieved a certain level in society, it would seem that your duty was to help others do that. Would you agree or disagree?
First, I never said that. That's probably your opinion, and I at this time I cannot say I disagree or agree or disagree with it. But it does return us to the focus of this conversation, which is supposed to be about society. Let me move on to the second question. The first one was the definition of the reasonable person. The second question is, what is the capacity of the individual? What can he do? What can he not do? And can we admit, first of all, that we are limited?
I think we have, maybe not collectively, maybe not every individual, but isn't science based on the fact that we are ignorant, like you said, word ignoramus, if you will, and that even when we come to conclusions and develop theories, that new information should make us change our minds, if you will.
Yeah, that's good insight. But I mean at an even more fundamental level. Let's say there's a big tree, and you need to move this big tree from point A to point B. It weighs 2,000 pounds. Can you do it by yourself?
No.
Right, and you're a pretty big person, so let's make it even more obvious. It's 20,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Like, you can't. Do you think any individual in the entire world can move that tree from point A to point B? 20,000 pounds.
No, on their own with just their physical body. No.
That's my point. It's a self-evident fact that an individual is limited. Now, this is the next logical step. What if you had 2,000 people, and they were all of the same mind, and they wanted to move that tree from point A to point B? Can they do it? 2,000 people. This is a 20,000 pound tree.
2,000 people, 20,000 pound tree. It seems likely they'd be able to do it.
Yeah, it's like 10 pounds per person, something like that. It's much more reasonable, anyways.
Yes.
That's my point.
The odds that they would achieve it versus you is much better. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my point. The individual has a certain capacity. There are things he can do. There are things he cannot do. He can pick up a 200-pound tree if he's very strong. He can't pick up a 20,000 pound tree.
Right.
And then a group of people, when they aggregate their strength, can do what the individual cannot.
So I've played team sports about my whole life. You said you've been in debate, which has a team element. No. Have you been in a team sport before?
No.
So yes, there has to be some level of transcendence where you see that this would not be possible without your teammates, your coaches, the training staff, your parents who got you there, all of that. And that helps you elevate yourself, right? So there's, I think this is the right term, like a reciprocal causation, if you will.
Sure.
Like as you improve yourself, right, you can help improve others, just based on the fact that you are going to see how all of this is possible only because of the team. And teams who do that really well, teams who can validate everyone, and there's some studies that have shown that like soccer teams do better when the coach makes sure that every single child is validated or seen, right? They're within a certain distance, right? In my profession, it's important to be within a certain few feet of people so they feel safe, right? To always be talking and validating certain things, right? If you're like the waiter who comes over and checks on water every 2 minutes, well, it's annoying, right? So it's finding that line where we're working together, but we're working individually. And that's going to change based on individual factors and the sport or the group activity. But in essence, that has to happen, and that does happen. So scaling that to society, because I'm describing all things, all sets of games that society allows to happen, right? So it would seem that it would scale up, right?
Yeah.
But I think we lose that insight. Why might we lose that insight? Are we so tribal? Are we so connected to our small subsets and subcultures that we forget about the grander scheme of things, if you will?
You're gonna have to reiterate the insight.
So do we spend so much time focusing on maybe our teams? Like if I like the Packers, right? Do I spend so much time on that I forget about America, right? Or our ideals that bring us together, even globally, right? As a just a community of human beings.
Well, that requires that you first define society.
Okay.
Do you have one?
I think aren't there multiple definitions of society?
Form your own. It's
a group of people who have collectively decided to live together. They've formed enough rules to sustain living together.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Mine was a collection of people who agreed to follow the same rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, why? Why would that occur in human history?
Why was that necessary?
Yeah. Form a hypothetical.
Just starting with, let's say Bob was by himself and needed to eat, right? He first hunts, finds shelter, finds the basics for himself, and then realizes this would be a lot easier if I had a partner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then that partner turns into a tribe, right? And then slowly but surely, you're almost living vicariously through other members of your tribe. Everybody is bringing something to the table, and you're achieving something that Bob couldn't have done on his own. He can sustain himself, right? But there's also some, what type of mindset would Bob have if he was only by himself, only hunting for himself, only finding shelter for himself? What is he dreaming of? Is he dreaming of finding another person, or is it just day to day, I need to survive, right? What's the IQ of a person like that? What you know what I mean?
It would be 100 because the average is 100, and he's the only one in the same.
There you go.
Trick question.
Thank you. So Bob moved from by himself finding desire to live, killed the moose or killed whatever animal so that he could, and then found shelter, found water, found all the necessary elements so that he could sustain long enough to find partner.
Yeah, those are all interesting.
Yeah.
The allegory I imagined was you would have two people or just a multiple of people running away from a single predator or just a predator, and then they go into the same cave and they all reach the common understanding, which is we should not kill each other, because if that thing is trying to kill us and we kill each other, then we're all going to die, and there's no point anyways. I would say that is the first law that a collection of people realized, It's like,
Yeah.
do not kill each other. And notice that every society that still exists has that rule in some form or fashion because it's a good rule. We highly value our lives, and if we can simply agree, which is an action, if we can simply agree to not kill each other and we follow that rule, then the reaction is we don't kill each other, fewer people die, life is preserved, and the public interest is served.
We're mitigating the damages of the innate chaos that is, and trying to create the best probable outcome for the future. Because we know that there's no such thing as a utopia. There's no final resting place for society, if you will. And as soon as we start to think that there is, that's when things start to slow down. I think moving and understanding that we have to innovate and continuously, I guess, cherish and continue to form these groups that we're talking about. Because if that's what started all of this, wouldn't it make sense that in some level that would scale to what's going to continue making this possible, right? Isn't that why social connections are one of the top predictors for longevity in a human's life, right? Like we need social connection, right? Like just this conversation is elevating my intelligence, right? Right? It's elevating our ability to connect as human beings, right? 30 minutes ago, I didn't know you as well as I do now, right?
Sure.
And hopefully if we continue to work on that, a month from now, we'll know each other even more, right? We may forget some of the things that we learned about each other, but we're moving to a place where our friendship is quote unquote better than it's been, right? Scale that out to society. We're in a space where technology, along with globalization, has allowed us to interpret and create more information than ever before. So there's, if you look at it dualistically, there's good and bad information, I suppose. I think that's subjective or dependent upon what group of people is looking at it, right? But it's important to validate both sides, right? To not necessarily say I am only going to look at the positives, right? I'm only going to look at and get stuck in the negatives. It's being able to shift in and out and understand that without both sides, if you will, we wouldn't have the entire circle or the environment in which we exist. So if we're trying to choose or create the actions that are going to make the future the best, right, we need to consider both sides. And I think we get caught up, and it's easy for people to get caught up on the negative. Look at media outlets or just content that's being shared. It may not always point towards a productive or positive future. And how does that impact our choices that we make now and the habits and the goals that we were talking about before?
Yeah. I want to return to an earlier idea you raised, which is that each person has their own needs, or each person has his or her own needs. Being in a society allows those individuals to better address their needs. And that's an incredible fact, because you have to remember that, well, first, we're all basically reasonable people. We may not understand all reason, we may not know all relationships between actions and reactions, but to some degree, we accept that if we behave in this way, reality is going to respond in this way. People understand that being in a society that would not otherwise receive, and their quality of life is improved because they're in a society. That's why they agree to this social compact, because they accept that they accept having to follow the laws in exchange for whatever society gives them in return. Collaboration increases the capacity of the individual. The internet is a byproduct of collaboration. This building, the building we currently are in, is a product of collaboration. The technology that we use is a byproduct of collaboration. Every single aspect of modern society is the result of people working together. Because if our property, if everything about us lived and died with us, then our knowledge too would only have the lifespan of one human being.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot develop the theories of science, of philosophy, of mathematics, etc., if they become extinguished within only 100 years.
Mm-hmm. So there's certain areas of study or certain theories that we've come to know are less true than the ones that we hold true and evident now. They're still important to understand almost as history. It was important for those people who were developing those theories and those people who were right afterwards maybe critiquing them and moving on to something that was better.
The transmission of one idea, the transmission of information from one generation to the next has allowed for the evolution of the idea. And as the idea has evolved, it has increased in value, accuracy, and efficacy. Chemistry at its earliest stages was alchemy, and it was complete fantasy. But now everything chemistry has its hands on everything.
So it was important that alchemy existed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that
historically speaking,
so that chemistry exists now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it's still fun, right, or important, I suppose, to go back and look at alchemy, right? Is there value for somebody who is writing a book about alchemy released in 2018? Do you think that adds value to the society?
If it's like Harry Potter, maybe.
Or if it's saying like this is what started chemistry as we know it, and it's kind of like comparing, contrasting.
It would be
showing A, B, C, D, and then A to D if you're working into a logic problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that, and people have done that with just about every subject, correct?
Sure.
Yeah, we can assume so. If we've done it with chemistry, then somebody's done it with other subjects.
Mm-hmm. This is a question of the utility of information. Why is it that we as a species crave knowledge? It's because knowledge, probably more literally than anything else, is power. When you have knowledge, like knowledge about chemistry, physics, engineering, you can create things that at some period in time was inconceivable. If you had this before, like during the Roman Empire and all the necessary infrastructure, you would be a god. This is magic to them.
So when you say that, I automatically think of all of these cultures, like back to Norse mythology. The gods, or the people who they thought were gods, were they just the most advanced people in that society, and they were coming up with the technology of the day?
It depends on whether the gods were based on a existing individual or on a metaphysical idea.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because you are a reflection or an embodiment of certain things. If you're a wise man, then someone can look at you and understand that you reflect the certain qualities of wisdom. It's like, or if you're a loving person, then you reflect certain qualities of love. And then these gods are simply the abstraction of those qualities.
Right.
And then they're personified so that people can understand them.
Like Christ consciousness in Christianity, if you will.
Sure.
In a sense.
I don't know about that. But that's I think that is the consensus for interpreting Norse mythology and the other religions. Like they are almost exaggerations of certain parts of humanity.
And we can touch on this another time, but there's a evolutionary purpose to those exaggerations and those beliefs. So there has been, correct? Are we entering a space where we can think beyond faith, like Sam Harris talks about, and we needed religion, and we needed these myths in order to get to a space where we don't? Are we replacing them with new stories?
Not quite. It depends on your conception of the utility of information.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is the purpose of information? What is the most valuable form of information? Let me posit this. Information is simply a law. It's a description about causality. If this is the action, and this action causes this reaction. That is the most basic form of information that exists. It's the most valuable form of information if it's true. Because it can be false. It may be true in some respects, it may be false in some respects. That means its value too is qualified. But the more true that it is, the more valuable it is. So let's use that the Norse gods, for example. I don't actually know any, but we say that there's this god, and he's the god of wisdom. Then to the extent that this god actually reflects or possesses attributes of wisdom, then that gives useful information to humanity. It adds value to their culture because it causes that society, the society that believes in this God, to idolize this trait. It's like they want to become wise. They want to be like this deity.
Mm-hmm. I think you're correct in that works until it doesn't, right? Until there's a new story. You may not care to answer it or care what the next story is. But what do you think we're moving into?
Well, that's what I was saying. Like when I said that ideas are transmitted from one generation to the other and that they evolved. That evolution is not a pretty process. It usually involves the massacre of the old idea so that a new idea can take its place.
It would seem that we're in a space now where a lot of people are nihilistic, if you will, because they feel like they've been misinformed with, as you may have said, was useful information in the past, right? If a certain story, like myths, provide someone with desire or with the ideal that they need to pursue wisdom, then that was useful. Now, if somebody then learns that all of that was made up for an agenda, right? They might say, what's the point of buying into this story? I'm going to be cynical. Everybody's looking out for themselves. Right? Whereas those stories seem to unify us in a way. And if we don't have one of those stories, where does society go? Right? We're going to cut so that we.
All right, we're back at it. Leanne Iannucci is going to be here in a second. She'll be walking in. We're going to go ahead and continue our conversation.
All right, so we were last discussing the evolution of information, and if you have an idea, which idea wins? In the battle of ideas, which idea wins in the grand scheme of things?
I guess the one that is accepted by more people, and that's not always necessarily the one that has society's best interest in mind.
So when we remember that but humanity used to think that the sun revolved around the earth. And Galileo was, I don't know if he was the first, but he advocated that the earth orbited the sun. I earlier said revolved, I meant to say orbited.
Right.
Not many people agreed with Galileo at the time, but of course Galileo's hypothesis was the victor in the end. And why is that?
It was the closest version of the truth, in that idea always wins.
Exactly, and that's also my conclusion. The idea that wins is the one that better reflects truth, the one that is more true. When we were talking about the gods, like we can even discuss the Greek gods. the Greeks said that Zeus was the one who caused the lightning and the thunder. So remember that information has to provide some description of causality. So when they asked, why is it that it's raining? Why is it that there are these storms, these monstrous events that seem to ready to destroy everything as we know it?
Mm-hmm.
Their rationale was, there is a god named Zeus in the sky, and he is casting thunderbolts towards the earth. And we have to appease him by behaving in a certain way. And many people believe this because it offered an explanation of a phenomena that was, to some degree, consistent with their experiences. Because they all had, at some point in their lives, known a powerful figure lashing out at them because of something they did.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an immediate connection that they could make. Now that of course is a theory. It's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
The connections that line up for me is that although in that myth you're saying people are, I guess their actions are reinforced by the fact that, you know, danger could happen, or in this argument it's the lightning bolt. But we also respond to negative stimulus more strongly than positive, if you will. If a predator was coming in to your area, you needed to get out,
Mm-hmm.
right, very quickly. And I think research has shown us that sticks with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
The negative stimuli is not necessarily more attractive, but it captures more of our attention than the positive. And I think that is only harmful if we don't validate that, right? We need to understand that there is chaos, there is things that are going to make us afraid, and it's okay to be afraid as long as you validate that fear and work through it, I suppose. And I think that's where we get caught up in our same behaviors, or we don't think with logic and reason, is because we are making fear-based decisions, and that is ingrained into us. And I may have taken that off-road, but
Yeah. So you created a fork. Do you want to continue the discussion?
let's bring that up another time, because I think we could talk about human behavior like that on another episode. Let's go with what you were talking about
Mm-hmm.
right before that.
So, in some period of time, anyways, society found value in the myth of a god casting lightning bolts from heaven
Mm-hmm.
as an explanation for that particular natural phenomenon. But centuries later, scientists or observers of nature provided an alternative explanation. They said that this was actually due to electrons, and
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't know too much about electricity, but
Mhm.
but they had some
And
explanation
the
that
ladder
was
was consistent with
So there are strings of truth in all of these stories, from science to ancient mythology, because in a sense they're all connected, because they, at a time, they were the idea that was closest to the truth until new information was discovered and applied to create something that was closer to the truth, if you will. So what are some of the problems that get in our way of finding the truest idea now in society, or do you think that we're doing just fine? Or is it even in our control? Is the truest idea always just going to come to the surface?
That's a difficult question because there's two different types of entities. We can say that there are physical entities, and that would be things that have physical form, things that can be empirically observed. And then we can say that there are metaphysical entities. And the good examples would perhaps be yesterday, because you cannot empirically
Mm-hmm.
capture yesterday, or even the future. Of course, we can conceptualize it. We can theoretically theorize it, think about it, and so on. But it's not like you have a sample of yesterday and a sample of tomorrow in your laboratory.
So,
Yeah.
so right now, in this moment, is the closest thing we'll get to our physical entity, if you will, or
Like an apprehension of
an
time.
apprehension of time.
Yeah.
This is our best chance to measure something empirically.
Sure, because
in this moment.
if you might, a counter argument might be, what about footage? What about video footage of yesterday? That's simply the recording of light hitting the whatever's in a camera.
Yeah.
And then there's a chemical or physical reaction, which just happens to. It's a very complicated process. And then that causation is reproduced at a later time when you're watching the video. That is not time being captured, that is something else being captured and then simulated. So you can see footage of footage of something.
You lose some of the emotion, you lose some of the humanity, I suppose, when you're watching a video, or is it just altered, right? Like I can watch a video of maybe my childhood or like a family member, and it's different now than it was in that moment. It's different now than it was 2 years ago, type of thing, you know?
That's not exactly where I was going, because I was simply saying that time is not something that can be like empirically observed. It's very complex.
As soon as you try to measure it, it's already
well,
gone.
like how do we measure time now? We don't measure time by having some time meter.
It's a construct, right?
Yeah,
Gregorian calendar.
It's a construct, but like we have a crystal, and then we know that it vibrates. It has a very consistent frequency. It vibrates at a very consistent frequency, and then we just say that if it performs so many cycles, that constitutes 1 second. But it's not. But that is a definition that we have constructed as a surrogate for time. It's not like we actually have time. If we want to say this is 7 inches, that's actually 7. Like we have that.
Mm-hmm.
But time is different. And
yeah, you can't say this is this much. How much is this time?
Yeah, I can't hold it.
Yeah.
So it eludes my powers of description, and maybe I'm failing at conveying the point. But in my opinion, time is something that's metaphysical, and it's a very good example of it. There are others too, such as humanity, or like your soul, your spirit.
The best authors, right? The best authors can describe things that are indescribable in a sense, right? They can create words in a metaphysical space that allow you to describe what is physical, I guess, or what some people have trouble describing, and that's why we look to those people, and that's why those people are important in our society, I suppose.
So you were talking about information, and like how we can correctly perceive true information.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult because there's information about physical things, and then there's information about metaphysical things. And information about physical things is like there's a TV right there.
Yeah.
And every single one of us can use our physical sense, our eyes, to look and see that there's a TV. If we lack eyesight, we could use our other senses and infer based on its shape, based on its taste. I don't know what a TV tastes like, but you use some sort of, you could infer somehow that there's a TV there because you have these senses. If we talk about love, how are we supposed to know what love is? And then how are we supposed to agree on this idea of love? How are we supposed to describe love? How are we supposed to quantify love? How are we supposed to do anything with love? And therefore, how can we say that something is true about love?
Mm-hmm.
The
true love idea.
Information can be true with respect to a specific conceptualization. That doesn't mean it's true in general. So if your definition of love is something like, you love another person when you are willing to hug that person, I guess that works. But another person may have an alternative definition. Love is when you are willing to die for another person. Like, which definition is actually true?
Yeah,
I don't
and
know.
then there's always questions that create nuance, and it's never as simple as just an answer. It always continues. So, what were you describing right before that?
Signals, maybe? Actions, capacity of a collection of people, society.
Again, we talked about how the now or these physical entities that we can actually measure compared to the metaphysical entities in yesterday. We discussed another time hard science and soft science,
Sure.
if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So the bulk of hard science, or like Newtonian physics, if you will, relies on physical entities and empirical data. What about something like psychology, sociology, anthropology,
Like
things like that?
to the extent that it relies on physical data, it's a hard science. And then whenever the scientists have to infer based on their ideas of how reality works, but it's not corroborated or supported by any physical data, like that is speculation.
Now, are these metaphysical? I mean, but you can't do. Can you do science, right, without metaphysical entities?
I would say no.
You can't.
Because
right?
numbers themselves are, like, the idea of a number is
Yeah.
a metaphysical entity.
So we are creating more metaphysical entities or more novel information as we continue. But how many discoveries can we make that are still like these physical entities? Right? We can't ever necessarily like find a theory for the universe and everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we can do our best to describe it, and that requires metaphysical entities or understanding that metaphysical exists.
All because a metaphysical idea, all because we're using a metaphysical entity does not mean that the metaphysical entity is not true.
Mm-hmm.
It is true. Like, it has value. It is something that you can apply. Like, we have numbers. You cannot touch the idea of one, but there still exists one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the physical embodiment of one. So as long as, I suppose, the metaphysical idea can be physically embodied, or the rules or our understanding of natural logic can be applied to the metaphysical entity, then the metaphysical entity is valid, its existence is valid. And I of course can elaborate if necessary.
Yeah, go ahead.
But ask me the question so I know where to go.
So what does art have to do with science, right? What purpose does art serve in science, if you will? Is math, is just writing out 1 to 9 or 1 to 100, is that art in a sense?
What's the purpose of art? Because now you've created, and this is true for every single concept, and I'm going to stop saying it from this point on, but art is a metaphysical entity because it's an idea. So then how are we going to define art? What is the purpose of art? And as soon as we can do that and create a physical embodiment, like have some
It's a physical embodiment of someone's metaphysical idea or dream.
Yeah,
It's a reminder that we can dream, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like we need it to be based upon fact in order for us to evaluate it. Because you can have some ideas, but unless I'm experiencing the same thing that you're experiencing, and that's only true if we're talking about like physical reality.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So the purpose of art, if this was a famous art piece and we were here discussing it, the purpose of it would be to share our opinion, and not necessarily in an effort to see whose was better, but just to create a melding of minds, if you will. Like, we're taking the information that only we, our person, can come up with, because I'm the only Reuben Volpe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like my opinion about that piece is important, right? Your opinion is important. That's why I'm having the conversation,
Sure.
And together we can come up with novel information that wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm. So understand that because your definition of art is so vague, encompasses everything within its scope,
Mm-hmm.
anything can constitute art. a white screen can constitute art, and then you can have your opinions about it, I could have my opinions about it, and our discussion would result in novel information. Not everyone has that definition of art. Others might say that art needs to be realistic, and that might describe the 16th century of art history.
Or like impressionist people drawing paintings of things that they were just observing, or they're trying to recreate reality on a canvas.
And a philosopher might say art is supposed to convey meaning, it's supposed to symbolize information, and that information is decided by the artist. Is it supposed to convey happiness? Maybe. Is it supposed to convey a person, like it's a portrait?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Like I can upload a document and have that information stored on this computer. In a sense, by putting up a painting, I'm uploading information into our space, right?
Yes.
I am creating the potential for discussion. I'm creating the potential for observation, at the very least, of the piece, which wasn't there before.
So we have a definition for art, and we can disagree about the definition because no one can perceive the true form of the idea. I think it's a Platonic ideal. It's the concept that there is a most perfect version of a thing, and we are unable to identify it, so we can merely approximate it, and we cannot say for certain whose approximation is closest. Still, you have this piece of art, and we've defined it, but then we also need to evaluate it. What is good? What is bad?
So how are we evaluating it then, right? We're using a scientific lens to evaluate our art, if you will, right? Like there are certain presumptions that people make about the art based on the information that they have in their head. Like if I only know that I like the color blue because that's the color blue that I've seen before, right? But I know nothing else about art. Like that's the only observation I can make is with actual tangible information, and that comes from logic and reason.
Yeah, on some level, we are relying upon conventions and findings of fact. So you have to look at that painting and see something that is actually there in order to respond to it. Maybe even the absence of something, the negative space or just a white canvas could be what was intended. But what I'm trying to say is that there needs to be something in order for you to respond to it. That something is a symbol that's supposed to connote or convey information. That information can be clearly ingrained into society. So if it was the word stop, every English-speaking person would recognize that. But if it was instead the color blue, and it was a man holding a guitar, that is still a symbol. It's clearly conveying information, but we don't know what the information is. And the only way we can interpret that information is through the lens of our lives. Everyone has a unique life. That means their interpretations are necessarily unique. And it's altogether possible that was the intention of the artist, to evoke different reactions from people.
Yeah, I think there's an example of that happening in our society now, where the gentleman who's going up in the SpaceX BFR is bringing in artists, right? He wants painters, he wants cinematographers, he wants like a dancer, he wants people from all these different domains or subsets of the art community to go up and see the moon as close as anybody's ever seen it, except for the people who've been on it, and then come back and make art for the rest of us, right? Like, what type of impact is that going to have? And just the fact that it's happening, I think, points to its importance and its value in our society. And if we lose art, if we lose the ability to have the metaphysical entity, or whenever that's suppressed, right? Like whenever you take away somebody's dreams in society, if you will, right? They're not reaching the cognitive level that they maybe could. They're not reaching the level that allows them to go and interpret art in an art museum, right? And that we've seen that historically, where people's lives are, I guess, suppressed so that other people's can prosper, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So the importance of art is dependent upon where you're at in society too. Like some people don't think about art at all, and maybe it would be good for them to experience that art. But what value is viewing art going to do for somebody who can't actually use that novel information? Like
Everyone appreciates art, because I think your definition of art is too narrow, or what constitutes art for you is too narrow. It's like, isn't the iPhone a piece of art? If I asked someone at Apple, wouldn't they describe the iPhone as a masterpiece?
Well, I guess what I was speaking to is some cultures view bureaucracy or the people in power so you can only read these books, you can only have this art, you can only see certain things. It's evidence to the impact that taking away or only allowing a certain type of art, it's evident to what impact that has on a society or on a person.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have to explain what you mean by dreams later, because it's a
It's a metaphysical idea of what the future will be like.
Okay. Is it the same as a goal?
A goal is just a term that we've created, a way of critical thinking, I suppose, like SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and timely. Like we've attached certain strategies and tactics to that. I think a dream. When I think of a dream, I think of when I was like in high school or grade school and couldn't go to sleep because I was dreaming about the next day, or I was dreaming about playing in the NFL. It wasn't a choice. The actions and the choices I made leading up to me laying in bed were my choice, but then laying there not being able to go to sleep, it wasn't. Like that was a dream of mine, if you will.
I think the distinction is unnecessary. Both dreams and goals are desirable future states of existence. It's like, what does it matter if it's realistic or unrealistic? They're as a class, they belong to the same class.
Do you think the unchosen manifestation of this idea of the future precedes the goal? Like somebody may have conditioned me or created this idea that I needed to be a football player, and then I made the goal. Was it somebody else's goal to get me to believe that? You know what I mean? Like
no, because even more fundamentally, dreams and goals are just desires. Because everything is in the future. It's like, I want to stand up. That's in the future. It's like anything you desire is in the future.
Yeah. I guess for me the word dream is more big picture, and then a goal is a more narrow look into it.
And is a goal just not like a means to a dream anyway? So it's like more of a stepping stone as opposed to two separate terminal locations.
I think they intersect. They're not different.
Okay. To me, it makes no difference, because I simply act on my desires. It's like if I want to be successful, it's like one person may characterize that as being a stepping stone. It's like another person may characterize that as being a terminal point or the conclusion. I have no idea when I'm going to die. I have no idea what my final action is going to be. To me, there are only desires and then acting on those desires.
So then, Dr. Bob, who had the desire to kill the animals so that he could live.
Excellent segue.
What was the first desire?
It's not too important that we determine that, like factually determine that, but we should establish the general principle that the capacity of the individual is limited and the individual can augment that capacity by cooperating with others. And in so doing, every member of that collective experiences additional benefit, a net benefit. So the person, like a person by himself may not be able to hunt a deer. A dozen people may be able to hunt that deer, then they all share in the bounty of that deer. So if you have an even larger tribe, you can have hunters and gatherers, and then if you have even more people, you can start developing culture.
So 3 books, and the third one I'm just now getting into. The first 2 have been transformative in my understanding of humanity. Sapiens and Homo Deus, I believe is how it's pronounced. And then the third book is 21 Lessons on the 21st Century. It's all, the author's Noah Yuval Harari, and in Sapiens he talks about how once we moved into bands or tribes of 150 people or more, we created gossip. Because we could no longer memorize all of the people in the tribe. We could no longer hold on to all of the information. So some of it was lost, and then a way to describe society now was gossip. We talked about each other instead of conversations that are measurable, like I'm talking to you. No, it's like the telephone game. The information now turns into misinformation on some level. And where that kind of took our society and the possibilities and the chaos that created. So as we continue to grow and as those social networks and interactions become more complex, it just opens up a world of possibilities, and we think we're in control of all of that, but in a sense we're only in control of our desires, our actions, our goals, like our dreams, and that collectively moves us somewhere, right? But are we all sitting, like how many billion people are on the planet now? 7 billion. Are all 7 billion people voicing in and saying this is where we want to take the ship, right? You know what I mean? So we there's only so much of this that we can control, and we can just do our best, you know. Which leads into
Well, yeah, because a society implies an interrelationship between, or a relationship between people, and once the society grows too large, that relationship becomes so attenuated that it no longer exists. It effectively no longer exists.
We've done our best to continue improving the technology that allows all of us to now sort out all of that, right? Like for a long time, I think it was what was created by gossip, what was created by societies moving and continuing to populate the earth and grow. Like maybe that was inevitable and that was out of our control. But are we moving to our space because we can access so much information, because we can predict so much of our behaviors? Are we moving to a space where we can control the future better? Right?
I dislike the premise, or I disagree with the premise. It's not that it was outside of our control. There's no such thing as the collective consciousness, but there is a general trend. Every single person within the society is acting on self-interest, is acting due to self-interest.
Yeah. So there's a collective self-interest that could be measured, I suppose, but we're not all agreeing on what that is.
And you don't have to, unless you are all required to be working towards the same objective.
I guess that's where I've been caught up in the past, right? Like like with idealistic views or just being naive, is that we have to all have like this shared reality if we want to continue moving forward. We all have to agree that we're going to do this. And it's not even necessarily about all of us agreeing on one certain thing. It's agreeing on the manners, agreeing on the terms that allow us to just mitigate damages, increase the probability that the future is good, not say everybody has to believe this one thing.
It's like the reason why we entered into a social compact was because it benefited the individual, not because it benefited society. If we imagine that there was a negotiation, and you had one tribe, and then you had these people, like persons. The deal did not go like this. Person, join our tribe so that you can benefit the society, irrespective of whether you are benefited. Because what type of person would want to join that tribe? It makes no sense whatsoever. It went like this. Join our tribe, because if you do, you'll be free from hunger, free from war, and you will be allowed to do business, and you will be rich, happy, and secure.
And that's all that individual needed to follow the rules, because they knew as soon as they were outcasted, they died. Whereas now, if there's a security net, whereas if you are in a company or you're in even like your family, if you say no, I'm leaving this, I don't agree with this, you have somewhere to go. The impact though of the truth that is that we had to follow the rules or we died is ingrained in us still. I think we've moved from that very basic understanding that if there's 20 people and Bob says, nah, I'm gonna go be by myself, Bob's probably not gonna make it, right? But now that happens on such a larger scheme or larger scale that people in the United States can leave their society, they can leave their subculture, if you will, and not die. There's a little bit more freedom to roam from tribe to tribe, if you will.
What is a tribe?
Not officially, but like a team or a company,
well, because
a group.
The person's not leaving society. The person is still within society. The definite part, like being an American citizen, entails paying taxes. It's like obeying the rule of law, and that's basically it. It's not about what It's not about what political party you belong to or what company you work for.
I guess I was talking more about moving away from different cultures you may have been a part of, or moving away from a family life that you didn't necessarily agree with.
Cultures are distinct from society.
Correct. So I was getting that. I was just getting that confused, or I was narrowing my lens away from the actual definition of society that we've come up with. Moving in and moving forward on that. What do you got?
Yeah. So, what is maximally beneficial for the individual? What is the best value proposition that society can offer to the individual? I posit that it's this: minimal contributions to society, or like society imposes minimal burdens upon the individual, and then the individual maximally reaps benefits from society. What do I mean? Well, the society doesn't require that all citizens have to be in the army for the entire duration of their lives. You can consider that to be the maximum devotion a person can give to a society. They're not even allowed to live the life they want to do. They are completely controlled by a despotic government. And then, if that's the maximum, the minimum is like you pay taxes, and then you follow very few laws, just like don't kill each other. And then besides from that, do whatever you want, and we're still going to provide some degree of healthcare, police, firefighters, etc., like an education system, etc. Right? So I think many people would think that is an attractive society. And that's probably why people flee from tyrannical countries and then head to democracies like America. Because that what I described is pretty close to what we currently have.
I would agree. And then there are certain subsets of society in America, would you agree, that don't have it as good of an opportunity as others, right? Like that's a fact.
Sure.
Right? Some people have it better than others.
Sure.
How did that happen if our society is always coming up with the truest ideas?
Okay, so the value proposition was only that you would receive more benefits than otherwise, and that society would also minimally interfere with your autonomy. that does not mean that society promises you any standard quality of life. If you are poor and society is only giving you so much welfare, I see no reason why society is obligated to make it so that you have at least the average quality of life. That if every single person in society, when deciding to join, had agreed to that proposition, then that's fine. So you see that the type of government is actually dependent upon the type of citizens that the country has. If everyone is fine with the communist government, and everyone is fine with the socialist government, if everyone is fine with the capitalist government, then any of those governments work. But if those people do not desire to be subservient to that kind of government or to be a citizen of that type of society, they're going to leave. And if there's no collective, there's no longer society.
What about the people who don't have the option of leaving, but still believe that, and it may be factual, that they do not have a fair shake? Right?
The issue
They're immobile and they're stuck in metropolitan areas where we see that the crime is the highest.
The issue you're raising is whether society desires to solve that problem. And my opinion is that it does not. That is not part of the value proposition society offers. It believes that it even can offer. All it's saying is that compared to all these other places in the world, you would rather live here because we have less crime, we offer greater mobility, and so on. It doesn't say we have no crime, and we guarantee social and economic mobility.
So it's easy to get caught up in those facts that some people just don't have it as good. And I think it's even worse than that, though, is getting nihilistic and cynical about it.
Yeah.
And it's so hard, because I haven't been in those shoes, to talk to somebody who may be in that position and maybe bring that up, because you don't want to offend them. But look at so many people who've been in that situation and overcome that, and it was because they refused to be nihilistic. They refused to let the man, if you will, get them down, and that was what ended up being the fire that got them out of that place. And then you look at people who come from well-to-do families, and their desire just isn't the same. They realize that whether they go out and become educated or successful, it doesn't really matter. They might lose a little bit of respect from their parents, maybe in some cases, but desire goes down. So both sides of the spectrum, we can lose desire, we can become more nihilistic, we can become more cynical, which is detrimental to society.
I want to say two things. So a lack of desire results in a lack of action, because you need to have a desire to do something. That is why nihilism is so destructive.
And I think it's emerging even more in our society, or we're just becoming more aware of it, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah. And then a society, remember that we said that a society that is too large results in an attenuated ability to influence the individual. Yes, we have the White House, and yes, we have Congress, and yes, we have the Supreme Court and all the other courts. That does not mean that this government apparatus is going to directly touch your life. It's like, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it's more likely the state legislature or the district laws that are really directly impacting you. A third point, we have already established that there are some things that exceed the capacity of the individual. I'm well aware that there are some people who are disenfranchised and experience crushing poverty. By themselves, they cannot uplift themselves. However, what is a society? It's a collection of people. So right now, we constitute a society because we're a collection of people agreeing to follow the same rules. Who's to say that a person who's poor can't also form a society? And if that society is sufficiently large, they should possess the capacity to do something productive, do something to improve themselves. That may sound unlikely, but that doesn't mean it's impossible.
I think that's why we we value those stories so much. It's because of how difficult they are, and it's a reminder that it's possible. Kind of like the art has value because it's a reminder of certain topics of conversation, or it's a reminder of the past in its own way. So I guess validating all of the stories, and not just the ones that are clickbait, not just the ones that are going to get the most views. It's creating a space where we show the chaos, so that there is desire to, I guess, in a way, believe in society. Show the positive, show the negative. But I guess it still comes down to the person's choice and what they're going to allow themselves to consume.
Sure. Yeah, because we frequently talked about the idea that action is a function of capacity, knowledge, and desire. You need to have the capacity to do something, the knowledge of how to do something, and the desire to do something, to do that thing. Like we talk about poverty and being social, like being disenfranchised. There is a reaction, or there is an action for bringing oneself out of poverty and disenfranchisement. The question then is whether that individual has the capacity, the knowledge, and the desire. Let's assume he has the desire. Because who enjoys being in poverty and who enjoys being disenfranchised? But the ability, that might mean you physically have to work extremely hard, long hours every single day, being away from your family, enduring verbal abuse from your employer, so on. The knowledge, it requires a good education, and that may not be provided by the infrastructure there.
That, and it requires an example, I think, too. If the only examples you've seen are of people failing, right, then you're going to model your behaviors after that person, and it's more likely that you are too going to fail. So if improving, I think we keep coming back to we're improving our ability to share information, to disseminate information, to predict our behaviors, to measure what we're doing now, what we've been doing in the past, what works, what doesn't work. I suppose where does the individual lie in that? What can we all be doing to make society aware of that, and continue moving towards the best probable outcome? Other than just setting goals for themselves, like what can we can agree that the government is doing something, whether we agree on whether it's what they should be doing or not, they are doing something, right? But what can we do at the individual level to make sure that these important interactions continue to happen, that the people who don't have the fair shake can see examples of people who have gotten out of that situation, so that society can move along? Because wouldn't you agree that people believing that they don't have a shot, people being nihilistic, wouldn't you agree that that is detrimental to society? It might be advantageous to the people who take advantage of those people, but as a whole, it's detrimental to your life as an individual and the life of everybody else. Because I don't know about you, my life is impacted seeing other people who don't have it maybe as good as I have, right? That influences my desire and my actions, right? Maybe not all of the time, but some of the time. We've been talking about logic, reason, how it applies to society, why we have it, why it works.
You didn't let me answer the question.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. At a minimum, people should improve themselves without harming others.
Okay.
That is the reaction. improve themselves without harming others. Reasonable people should pay attention to their actions and their reactions. If I rob a bank, I improve myself because I improve the amount of money I have, but I have harmed others in the process. I may not even improve myself because I could get arrested and go to jail. That's one action I could take. Another is I could start a business. And if that business is successful, I can hire people. And when I hire people, they have cash and they can afford a better lifestyle for themselves and their family. Mm-hmm. I'm not harming anyone, or at least I don't see myself harming anyone by running that business. I would say at a minimum, that is good behavior for people to engage in. Improve themselves without harming others. At a maximum, people should improve everyone. And this is like the highest form of good. And it can only be done if you have the capacity, knowledge, and the desire to do so. This is the most difficult thing possible. It's like how can you cure cancer? You can't cure cancer unless you have incredible, I don't even know if we've done it yet, but you would need incredible amount of funds, the most talented people that this species has to offer, and just overwhelming desire, because obstacles will be presented to you all the time. That is the range of behavior that people can follow. And yeah.
Those people that you just described, in a way, are they more selfish or less selfish? Because and I guess it doesn't matter, but those types of people are so consumed with their mission and their dreams, mm-hmm. which in this sense, it may be a collective dream and a collective desire. But Leanne has to be, if she's going to be the best scientist she can be, she has to be focused in mm-hmm. on getting that job done, focused in on my viewpoint, my subjective viewpoint of the world. And maybe I'm not so concerned with what my family's doing mm-hmm. or what other people are doing in other parts mm-hmm. of the world. Is that selfish, or is it productively useful for everyone because this person's going to find the cure for cancer?
Do you think it's also is it part of the human condition to want to help others, help yourself without harming others? Because I feel like that'll get to that, right? If mm-hmm. my singular goal is to become the best scientist, will I have an innate desire to also not harm others, to put me at the bottom of that ranking list? Or, because I feel like that in itself is kind of where humanity falls, right? Is our goal to better ourselves, or does that also include the condition to not harm others innately?
Yeah. And then you argue with harm other things,
yeah.
other life forms, mm-hmm. and then who makes those decisions? What animals do we eat, right? What animals do we not eat? How do we treat animals? How do we treat another species if we happen to come across one? We're always trying to just point towards the best answer, knowing that it's not the only answer, and it's not to 100% completion. It's never perfect. It's never done. I read somewhere where perfecti, the Latin word just means to finish, to be done. And somewhere along the lines we came up with perfect, with this idea that it is the best, the absolute finished product, that it can't be beaten. But in a sense, all it means is it's done. So would that imply that nothing's perfect and that we're never done with this experiment? And if we hold that as true, that we could stop trying to search for a utopia or a way out or an end or a theory for everything, so that we can just sit back and not worry about things.
I'm going to answer her question, and then that'll be the last question I answer, because there's too many questions. I disagree with the proposition that our human condition instructs us to not harm others. A theory of self-interest would suggest that we don't harm others because we're aware of the possibility that they will harm us. This is a reciprocity. If I believe that Reuben had no chance of harming me whatsoever, I could abuse him to no end, and vice versa. That's probably the most grim yet most accurate depiction of justice, because justice is simply what actually happens. I won't elaborate on that at this time. I want to suggest the existence of something called optimal selfishness. If selfishness is acting in accordance with your self-interest, then I can rob a bank now. But the effect of that action on me in the future may be more harmful, so that I experience a net harm. An optimal selfishness would seek to maximize that net benefit. So, yes, I could be violent towards you now, and that may give me some short-term gratification, but perhaps, and more realistically, cooperating with you, making sure that we're on good terms so that we can maintain the society is likely much more beneficial to me in the end. That is the optimal selfishness will therefore persuade me to not lose your good graces.
I think that, and you believe that's achievable, but for everyone.
I think that's what we aspire to
That's
do.
what we aspire
I won't
to.
say that we actually do it.
Right.
So is that not the means of, like if you teach everybody to operate under the guise of optimal selfishness, will that not benefit society as a whole in order to disseminate the desire, and like as opposed to on the less, like instead of disseminating knowledge, just disseminating the concept of optimal selfishness itself as opposed to anything else? Like will that optimize like societal?
You would have to teach everything, because our economy is predicated upon selfishness. It's like the idea of capitalism. It's like companies compete with each other in the free market and seek to lower the prices of their goods because they want to increase the viability of their business. It's like that action might cause the other companies to go extinct, but it's a good public policy, because the lower cost of these products means a better value proposition for consumers. Knowledge is necessary so that people can be informed of what's the best course of action. Because I can be aware of this idea of optimal selfishness, but I still have to know what are the actual benefits and harms associated with every single action. So a child would still need to be raised to understand that being rude to others is bad, having manners is good, studying is good, fighting is bad. It's like they need to have some value system.
Now,
Is this the last question?
I suppose. Who or what institution gets to decide what that is, and who is best suited to construct the idea of absolute selfishness or optimal selfishness? Is it not up to the person to decide that? Are you not the best served, or the best person to come up with your idea of optimal selfishness, or what those strategies and tactics are to achieve that?
So we're only talking about one person and not a collective of people, correct?
Correct.
Then the answer is that it changes with every phase of their life, his or her life. When the person was an infant to a child, he will have, I will use he will have the most interaction with his parents. And his parents will be the one who can most directly instruct him as to how to live. The parent will persuade him that certain things are good and certain things are bad, and the child will remember that knowledge, and that will inform his value system. As he grows older, he will start to interact with other people, and those people will tell him new information, and some of those will take possession of him, and he'll be persuaded. So he might abandon some of the precepts of his childhood for these new ideas. He's still impressionable. He's still transforming. Yet, at some point in his life, when he reaches his intellectual maturity, he will have a mind of his own. And that's when he can look upon the world and have his own thoughts and opinions. They will still be influenced and guided by everything that he's experienced. It's like we see things through our experiences. But at least at that time, he can be considered to be an autonomous individual.
And I think that points to the importance of the individual and the importance of some idea of personal choice,
right? And creating the environment for that personal choice to happen. And that's what the government is doing, correct? That's what society is doing.
The other one was the last question. What is?
Yeah, no, but I guess my personal assumption is that is happening,
Mm-hmm.
and that it will continue to happen, and what that looks like is constantly going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta get going.
I gotta get going.
Thank you for joining me. That's all for the first episode of Theory of